this is an extensive operation right now, really one that we've never seen before. Israel is on the ground, controlling northern Gaza, going into these tunnels, and is going to demilitarize Hamas. I think that's the extent of the vision. When it comes to a political process and a diplomatic program afterwards, they're punting.
Well, we were hearing those remarks from Joe Biden about a possible deal came rather bizarrely during that Thanksgiving ceremony in the United States. But, do you think there are real signs that there could be some sort of hostage release deal on the cards?
This is like the yo-yo of our debate these days in Washington about will it or won't it. I mean, it is one day yes, one day no. It could happen at any moment, then it turns around. I'd say it's 50-50. How's that for odds? But I do think there's a lot of momentum towards some kind of an agreement. The Qataris who are mediating this and very intensively continue to plod forward, continue to push Hamas, continue to stay in touch with the Israelis and the United States. And I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure to get it done. But the question really is, what's the cost going to be to each side? And in particular, my sense is that it's a question of, will Israel continue to surveil and continue to have oversight over Gaza while there's a pause so that Hamas can't use this for military purposes to kind of regroup itself and get its military command back in order?
Yeah, we saw the partial evacuation of the Al-Shifa hospital where there has been fighting going on. The Israelis say that there is a Hamas control center underneath the hospital. But we did see at least the evacuation of these 28 premature babies who have now been flown to Cairo for treatment. I guess that does show that there are channels of communication open and there are at least prospects for negotiations continuing.
Thank God, for those babies. And Carol, 37 Israeli children were kidnapped by Hamas and are still missing, still somewhere under the ground of Gaza. The children in this war are victims, and they are pure victims on both sides of this conflict. And I hope that what you're describing is part of a trend to really create effective humanitarian corridors for the Palestinians in Gaza who are suffering deeply, and to ensure that there's really reduced death and harm coming at them. But, again, it goes back to this question about Hamas. And what is Hamas's end game, and what are they trying to do? Are they trying to just maintain a position of constant threats against Israel, or are they actually looking for an end game where they lay down their arms? And there's no clear point coming from them, or there's no statement coming from them that they want to cease fire themselves beyond just a respite to be able to get their bearings again. And that's what makes me a little bit pessimistic about what we're looking at here. But all that said, getting the children out of harm's way, those who are most vulnerable, is a high priority. And it really is long past overdue that the Israeli children get released as well.
Yeah, the International Committee of the Red Cross has said tonight that its head is due to meet Hamas. I wonder whether that...
No visits up till now.
I wonder whether that is significant and whether that could at least perhaps pave the way towards some kind of temporary pauses or some of these humanitarian pauses that both the US and the UK have been pushing for.
It certainly can help. And to your point, look, third parties are few and far between. Qatar is the third party. Egypt is a third party. And, of course, the ICRC, the Red Cross, they're a third party, trying to mediate and get in some way engaged in the humanitarian aspect of this. But when it comes to third parties on the military side, the ceasefire side, there's really no third parties yet. Hamas continues to fight. Iran continues to push the buttons of its proxies around the Middle East. And the United States, we continue to support Israel. So in the middle of that conflict, having the Red Cross get engaged would be a welcome move. And certainly people in Israel and the United States are noting that Hamas has not allowed any humanitarian visits to any of these captives.
Indeed, and we've been hearing tonight about fighting around another hospital, the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza. But what about that point that you raised about what Israel's intentions really are? We had at one stage Prime Minister Netanyahu suggesting that the Israelis would need to continue to have control over parts of Gaza. There was some concern about that. All we've been hearing from the Israelis is about this desire to destroy Hamas. I mean, do you get any sense of at what point Israel could possibly say or declare that it's done enough to end or pause its military offensive?
So far, Israel has not laid out a day after scenario in any meaningful detail that any country understands. What Israel is doing right now is what it stated it would do and what the prime minister said he would do at the beginning. And I think where they're heading is to try to demilitarize Hamas, decapitate Hamas, of course, go after their leadership and their fighters, and scour Gaza, quite frankly, for any weapons that they can find. This is an extensive operation right now, really one that we've never seen before. Israel's on the ground, controlling northern Gaza, going into these tunnels, and is going to demilitarize Hamas. I think that's the extent of the vision. When it comes to a political process and a diplomatic program afterwards, they're punting, to use an American phrase, punting. They're kicking it down the road for another day. And I think that's where the United States gets anxious and President Biden gets anxious. And frankly, the Israeli public also a little bit anxious about where are we heading here, because there's no sustainable peace without a diplomatic program that locks in any type of military victory that Israel will claim to have obtained. That is not clear as of this moment.
And the United States, under President Biden, have stuck to this line about saying that they would support humanitarian pauses, but they're not calling for a ceasefire. They accept the Israeli argument that that would be to play into the hands of Hamas. But you've now got claims, admittedly, it's from the health ministry in Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas, of more than 13,000 people dead. We've seen these desperate scenes at the hospitals, and more civilians who have fled from parts of northern Gaza, then finding that they're shelled when they get to other parts of the Gaza Strip. I mean, is there a sense in which the pressure is growing on the United States to use its influence to try to restrain Israel's military offensive?
Well, I have to tell you, I believe that President Biden has been doing this since day one, actually. From where I sit, it would have been impossible to have imagined Israel not responding to the heinous attacks of October 7th that killed 1,200 of its own people in cold blood. And so Israel was going to go in, period. And they were going to go in hard. And I think where President Biden not only did he show sympathy for Israel and support, but he also played it in a way where he could have influence, because he has that influence. The United States has been pressuring Israel to be careful, to open humanitarian corridors, to allow goods in, all the things that are necessary to support the Palestinian people. But clearly there's always more. And the demands for a ceasefire in the United States are growing. But even if President Biden were to call for a ceasefire, I'm not convinced that would stop Israel from its offensive. And I think that, in fact, it may weaken the American leverage in pushing for humanitarian outcomes that are better and diplomatic visions that are clear. Right now, Israel is, in its view, a war for its own existence. This is a war it has never had before in its 75 years. And it is taking it to Hamas in a way that it has never. And I don't think the Americans could stop this regardless. But I do think that President Biden is cognizant of the cost of this to the Palestinian people. It's extremely high. And certainly to Israel and the global opinion, it has been a very negative drag on Israel and on the United States globally. We've taken our shots. But I do think that the United States is continually pushing Israel to take care, to reduce humanitarian impacts and civilian costs as much as possible.
And this is also tied up with Joe Biden's hopes of another term in the White House, because his poll ratings are slumping, and part of that appears to be concerns about his policy on this.
There is a bit of a paradox, and there's some fascinating polling that's been coming out recently in the last several days. Certainly amongst younger voters in the Democratic Party, the president's position is unpopular. That is without a doubt. That is indisputable. Amongst older voters, those who tend to vote more often, it's still strong. But overall, in a chart, in a recent poll about popularity, who tops popularity in this chart? Israel, above all. So overall, taking all likely voters into account, Israel is still very popular. It outranks Palestinians, if one would look at that as a legitimate way to view this conflict, significantly. But within the Democratic Party, yes, there's a lot of pressure, certainly amongst the base and certainly amongst young voters, and a concern that if this continues to drag, the young voter enthusiasm will be weak, and in particular in the state of Michigan, which is a swing state and has a major population of Arab Americans that are incredibly upset with the president's position right now.
And we know that there have been these polls out showing him potentially losing to Donald Trump in those key swing states. He was 81 today. And I mean, we heard a few of his comments at that traditional ceremony for Thanksgiving. And not only did he make those remarks about a ceasefire, he also appeared to get himself completely confused over Beyonce and Britney Spears and Taylor Swift. And I mean, this is in the process of a short ceremony. I mean, I just wonder whether, yet another fluff when he's there appearing in public. Does that send further jitters through the Democratic Party?
Oh, the poor guy. He's under such a microscope. He can't turn without having somebody take a shot at him. I think that, yes, it's going to be the issue that continues to dog him, because the other issues he's good. The American people like the idea of a strong, solid democracy. We want our health care. Women want the right to decide what to do with their own bodies. We want to fight climate change. These are all the issues that Joe Biden has been incredibly effective at advancing. Plus, he's rebuilt a strong economy, but that message hasn't yet penetrated according to the polls. But he's there. If age is the only thing dragging him down, he'll be in good shape. But certainly, when he faces Donald Trump, who's like 2 years his junior, I think age is going to be neutralized quite a bit.
Joel Rubin, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Really good to speak to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Carol. My pleasure.